This should be a quick overview of U.S. imperialism, and we're going to start with Asia with the nation of Japan. Actually, you have first contact with Japan in the 1850s. This is when U.S. Commodore Matthew Perry and a fleet of U.S. steamships um, forced Japan, which was a closed country at that time, to open up to trade with the United States and eventually other Western powers. And the Japanese actually make an important decision when they're sort of forced to open trade to modernize. So we're going to see Japan very rapidly accepting Western technology. You can see, in these pictures, using railroads, using telegraph wires, steel bridges, adopting Western style of dress, and they will also rapidly militarize and modernize their military. And this is going to happen under the Meiji Restoration and rule of their emperors, who are actually still in Japan today. Japan, after modernizing, is going to fight a war with Russia and do extremely well in that conflict, take additional territories, sink the Russian fleet, and really assert themselves as the dominant power in Asia. Teddy Roosevelt is going to be invited to mediate a treaty to end this war, the Treaty of Portsmouth up in New Hampshire. And for that, he will receive the Nobel Peace Prize. But we're going to see Japan as an increasing threat in Asia to countries like Korea and eventually China. We do have a number of Japanese immigrants in the United States, and they are going to be discriminated against. We'll see in places, especially like California, Asian students placed into segregated schools. This is going to be very insulting to the Japanese, and as a result, Teddy Roosevelt and the Japanese will come to an informal gentleman's agreement that the Japanese will agree to reduce their immigration, especially of laborers, to the United States in exchange for the U.S. government ending those insulting segregation practices. In the 1920s, we will completely end Japanese immigration to the United States. We will also make a deal with Russia in the 1860s to purchase Alaska. At the time, this was thought to be a huge waste of money. It was referred to as Seward's icebox or Seward's folly. William Seward was Secretary of State under Lincoln and then Andrew Johnson. But with the discovery of oil and gold in Alaska, as well as the huge amount of territory, this was actually a real steal for $7.2 million. China, unlike Japan, in the face of increasing Western contact, chooses not to modernize. And the result is going to be they're carving up into these spheres of influence, which are areas where Western powers like France and Britain will sort of dominate key coastal ports and river regions and control trade in those areas. And this makes the United States really nervous that either China will fall entirely and will be carved up into colonies, or will have its great market closed off to U.S. trade. So under William McKinley, his Secretary of State John Hay is going to establish the open door policy, which says that all nations should have access to trade in China, even in these different countries' spheres of influence, that U.S. merchants would be able to go there and trade, open businesses, etc. Now, all of these countries that we sent open door notes to will basically either ignore or reject this policy, but that does not stop John Hay from announcing that it is success and in place. And it's going to be this policy that will eventually lead us to taking China's side against Japan in World War II. This is an example of U.S. economic imperialism, where we're certainly profiting and exploiting the markets of a country, but we're not actually taking political control. We're not making a colony there. In China in 1900, we're going to see an uprising against all of this Western interference. A group known as the Righteous Harmonious Fists, who do practice martial arts, so they get sort of the nickname the Boxers, will revolt. They're going to attack Chinese Christian converts, missionaries, foreign merchants, and diplomats, and in response we'll have a Western force, including U.S. troops as well as troops from Japan and Europe, to crush this uprising and force China to pay huge amounts of reparations, over $300 million. And this is really going to weaken the Chinese dynasty ruling, and they will fall within a decade. Moving ahead to Hawaii, we're going to have people active in Hawaii for quite some time. Initially missionaries, and then later setting up sugar and pineapple plantations. Um, these American investors are going to lead a revolution against Queen Liliuokalani um, as she opposes U.S. control of her country. President Cleveland is going to reject their call for annexation. He'll say she will have been unjustly um, overturned, and we will see Sanford Dole then declaring Hawaii an independent republic and announcing himself as president. This is the founder of Dole Pineapple, which you probably know today. He is going to have the Queen arrested, tried for treason, sentenced to a number of years of hard labor, as well as several fines. In 1898, a few years later, amidst the Spanish-American War, William McKinley will annex Hawaii. And it will become eventually a U.S. territory, and in 1959, a U.S. state. Filipino-American War. The Filipinos who we fought with in the Spanish-American War believed that they were fighting for independence, which they would receive once Spain was defeated. However, the Treaty of Paris gave us ownership of the Philippines. It made it a colony. And very soon after that, the Philippines will rebel against American rule. This will lead to a long and brutal war between the United States and the Filipino rebels, who are led by Emilio Aguinaldo. We'll have more American casualties from this war than the Spanish-American War, as well as huge death rates among Filipino soldiers and civilians. And we'll see the United States adopting a lot of really vicious tactics that the Spanish had used. Up in the top right, this picture is showing U.S. troops waterboarding a Filipino insurgent. We'll also see the setup of concentration camps, the burning of villages, the forced movement of people, and the result is going to be over 200,000 Filipino civilians dying. We will eventually be successful, and the United States will rule the Philippines until after World War II. And this is just showing some of our territories. We do take a large number of small Pacific islands, places like Midway you may have heard of from World War II, or Wake Island. A lot of these are simply U.S. naval bases. Puerto Rico, which we will gain in the Treaty of Paris, we will make an unincorporated territory, basically run by the U.S. military. Puerto Ricans will not be made citizens, will still have tariffs against their goods. And this sort of leads to an interesting question of, do the places we take over then get all of the rights of the Constitution? And basically the U.S. Supreme Court says this is up to Congress. So we can choose to give them citizenship and constitutional rights, or we can deny that to them. So this is where we get that phrase, the Constitution does not follow the flag. We will sort of make some adjustments to this for the Philippines and Puerto Rico in the Jones Act under Woodrow Wilson, where we'll grant citizenship for the people of Puerto Rico, but we'll continue to appoint their governor and their high-level government until the 1940s. We'll see economically U.S. Businesses swoop in, buy up a lot of land, set up very profitable sugar plantations, who are worked by the Puerto Rican people, will largely live in poverty. We do bring, to the Philippines and to Puerto Rico, schools, hospitals, sanitation roads, but we will see a lasting legacy of poverty. Even today in Puerto Rico, the poverty rate is, as you can see, almost 50%. And it continues to not be a U.S. state. Cuba. We've learned about the Teller Amendment, which guaranteed Cuban independence, so we do not make it a colony after the Spanish-American War, but we do adopt this Platt Amendment that we forced the Cubans to add to their constitution in 1903 if they want U.S. troops to withdraw from their country, which have been stationed there since that war. And they basically have to agree to give us sort of control over their foreign policy, allow us to intervene by sending troops into their country, which we do repeatedly, and have a lease on Guantanamo Bay, which we maintain to this day. In Panama, we'll see Teddy Roosevelt pushing for the creation of a canal. And the reasons for that can be seen obviously by this map on the bottom right, where we're saving, thousands and thousands of miles of travel, right? 8,000 miles by having a canal through Panama as opposed to having to travel around South America. This makes sense, especially as we have colonies in the Caribbean and in Asia at this point. We could move our navy swiftly. When Colombia rejects our offer of $10 million to buy a strip of land in Panama, which was a province of Colombia, we will support a Panamanian uprising against Colombia. They form an independent country with the support of the U.S. Navy and our recognition, quickly sign a treaty, and we start building the Panama Canal. This takes us about 10 years, but will definitely speed transit. Despite the great difficulties of building this, you can see from the picture all the locks that had to be constructed. We had to fight yellow fever, etc. It is finished in 1914 under Woodrow Wilson due to Teddy Roosevelt's sort of aggressive policy. Teddy Roosevelt is actually going to go to Panama during the canal construction. You can see him here. He's the first president to ever leave the United States while president. He's also well known for the Roosevelt Corollary, and this is an amendment or an addition to the Monroe Doctrine, which says although we don't have any interest in taking land in Latin America, we do have the right to intervene to prevent European powers from intervening. So if a country, for example, Santo Domingo, goes into debt to a European power, we can go in, take over their custom houses, collect money, and repay that debt to prevent a European country like Germany from coming in, breaking the Monroe Doctrine and interfering in these countries. So this is actually going to really sour our relationship with Central and South America, that we are interfering with their internal affairs. And this is all sort of part of Teddy Roosevelt's big stick diplomacy, sort of the U.S. as a policeman patrolling Central and South America. And as you can see from this map, we have sent U.S. troops into many Central and South American nations repeatedly. If you look at Nicaragua, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Honduras, Panama, etc. Taft is going to have a different program. He's going to favor dollars over bullets, saying that instead of using U.S. troops, let's use U.S. companies and investment so we can gain influence over these countries in Central and South America. Unfortunately, he usually ends up having to use dollars and bullets because as there's resistance to U.S. companies, we then send in the Marines to protect U.S. property and personnel. So this is not tremendously successful as a policy. Woodrow Wilson is going to have a more morally superior sounding program, moral diplomacy, where he says the U.S. as a democracy, as this great nation, should act in a conscientious way in their foreign policy. We should correct past wrongs. So he's going to be the one who passes that Jones Act, giving citizenship to the people in Puerto Rico, for example, and also work to promote peace and democracy. This is also not going to be very effective. We see him condemning colonialism, although we buy the Virgin Islands under Woodrow Wilson. We also see in Mexico his interference in the attempt to not support a series of dictators. He is going to have U.S. sailors who get arrested while they're sort of patrolling a bit in Mexico. He's going to have us occupy a city there because we won't recognize this military dictator, Huerta, or sell guns to him. He'll be replaced by another dictator who then causes us to temporarily support Pancho Villa, who's another general. Then we stop supporting him and he starts raiding across the U.S. border, and we send a force into Mexico and basically have those troops there through World War I, which sort of brings an end to it. So that's sort of a quick overview of U.S. imperialism.